Hi everyone, this is Robert and welcome to In Deep Geek Live. Today we are looking at Aegon III, probably one of the lowest rated Targaryen kings of them all. Is that fair? We'll take a look at that today. But before we get into all of the detail, relatively important announcement in terms of where you can see these live streams going forward. As of next week and from then on, these live streams, the Thursday live streams, 10 p.m. my time, 5 p.m. Eastern, they will be appearing on IDG Live, my second channel. So you will need to make sure that you're subscribed to that, getting the notifications. There's a link down in the description if you want to make sure. There will also be a link coming up later on. I'm sure the moderators will put a link in there if you're watching this live, but please do go and make sure that you're subscribed to that channel. All of my live content is going over to there. It's not just going to be live streams, short form content. I'm going to be doing interviews, a whole load of other really exciting stuff. So that is starting as of next week. So this is the last live stream on this channel, and we're going to go out with the Targaryen king who many blame of the great Targaryen rule. He has got many bad monikers in his name, but basically it's all down to the fact that the last of the dragons in Westeros died during his reign. This is Aegon III, Dragonbane. So let's, as I always try and do, let's do a sort of an overview of who he is, what his reign and his rule and his life was about, and then we'll get into some questions from my patrons. So we did see him in House of the Dragon very briefly. He appears in episode 8 of House of the Dragon. If you remember, he's the firstborn son of Rhaenyra and Daemon Targaryen, and he is brought to be presented to King Viserys. He's very young on the show. He has 2 older half-sisters from Daemon's first marriage, 3 older half-brothers from Rhaenyra's first marriage, and he will have a younger brother. We did also see him, Viserys, who was just a baby on the show, and then another sister who will tragically die in childbirth, Visenya. So he is born into royalty. Now, there is a slight age difference between the books and the start of the Dance of the Dragons. He is 9 or 10 years old. On the show, I don't know exactly how old they were wanting him to be, but it looks probably 4 or 5, something along those lines. So there are differences there. I will unpack what those differences might mean a little bit later, because I've got a question about that specifically. But he spent his early life at Dragonstone. He grew very close to his brother, Viserys, and he had a dragon, a small dragon called Stormcloud, who by the start of the Dance of the Dragons, he'd never ridden him. It was still a very small dragon, but he was being brought up in a particularly Targaryen, Valyrian way. Now, then we get the outbreak of war. Team Black were on Dragonstone, and we get to the early exchanges in the war. And now, at this point, I probably have to give my usual spoiler warning. The policy on this channel is show spoilers are not okay, book spoilers are okay. The book's been out for a while now, so I don't think there's anything particularly new to be spoiling there. The show has been roughly sticking by what's going on in the books, but there are a few changes. So I'll tell you what happens in the books. It'll probably happen roughly the same on the show. So as long as you're aware of that, we'll carry on. The early exchanges in the Dance of the Dragons leads to, as we've already seen, Lucerys dying. He's the guy who has the smaller dragon on Arrax and gets killed by Prince Aemond right at the very end of season 1 of House of the Dragon. So that's his first half-brother dies. After that, there's a lot of sort of small exchanges. We get Blood and Cheese, we get Eric and Arik, get the Battle of Rook's Rest, things like that. Jacaerys goes off on this mission to try and gain some new allies up in the north. He goes to Winterfell. When he arrives back, we get this opportunity for Team Black to be trying to retake King's Landing, or take it. And Jacaerys, obviously, he's a bit cut up about having lost Lucerys, his brother. He suggests, Daemon agrees, why don't we send the two smaller children, this being Aegon and Viserys, why don't we send them just off to somewhere safe? Let's send them over to Essos, out and away from the action. We'll deal with, they can't really fly the dragons and get involved in things anyway, so we'll deal with the warfare. They can head off to safety. Everyone's okay with this. They put them in some boats, send them off over the sea. However, there is at that time the fruits of Otto Hightower's diplomacy. He had written off trying to get the Triarchy on side. He knows the Triarchy hate Daemon, so it worked. They came up with a fleet, and they arrived just at the time this small fleet was trying to get over to Essos, and so they attack them. Now, this is a really important moment for Aegon. As I say, at this point, he's 10, 11 years old. He's never ridden his dragon, but there's a battle. His brother has only got a dragon egg. He hasn't. His dragon hasn't hatched yet. He has got a dragon, Aegon, and he decides this is the moment. He gets on his dragon. His first flight is to escape that battle. His dragon, Stormcloud, gets injured during the battle, but somehow this young dragon with this young prince manages to make it back to Dragonstone, warns everybody about what happened, and they manage to get some degree of vengeance. This, however, left Aegon traumatized because the dragon, his dragon, had been injured during the battle and now died. It was just a small dragon. He'd only ridden this dragon once, and his dragon had died. And this, as far as we can tell, almost certainly will have hugely, the bond between Dragon Rider and dragon is very strong. This will definitely have impacted on him. But also he had huge scars, emotional scars, from the fact that he left his brother Viserys, who he was very close to. He abandoned him. He did the right thing, but he abandoned him, and he had these emotional scars from that moment on. Added to which, Jacaerys, having heard about all of this, then gets on his dragon and goes out and tries to take on the fleet, and he also dies. So that whole incident loses Aegon, his dragon, his brother, and his half-brother. He is scarred from this. He goes into himself. He gets dark and moody. But Team Black do take Dragonstone. When Rhaenyra thinks it's safe, she calls for him, she brings him to King's Landing, and he stays there by her side. While he is there, he sees the storming of the Dragon Pit. Another one of his half-brothers, Joffrey, sees a chance to go and try and help out. Joffrey climbs on his dragon and goes and tries to help out, and he sees Joffrey die as well. In a short period of time, he has lost his brother, all three of his half-brothers, and his dragon. He gets even more silent and miserable. His mother is forced to flee King's Landing. He goes with her. He is now effectively the heir. And they make their way back to Dragonstone, but when they get to Dragonstone, huge plot twist, it turns out that this is where Aegon II, the Team Green's king, has been hiding out, and he feeds Rhaenyra to his dragon. And then Aegon sees his own mother eaten by a dragon. And you can imagine in this short space of time, he had a reasonably happy upbringing, but in a short space of time, he's lost his brother. He's lost 3 half-brothers who he grew up with. He's lost his mother. He's lost his dragon. He is incredibly traumatized by all this. The war starts to draw to a close. Aegon II is king back in King's Landing, but eventually he is poisoned, and Aegon III is left. Now, the deal that was struck is that Aegon has to be engaged to Geer, Aegon II's daughter. So this is one of these kind of bringing the 2 sides of the family together moments. But also, Geer is very young, and he's not of age either. So this is just a sort of an official marriage. And he, although he is king, he is too young to rule. So we get what is known as the Regency. And the Regency is, I think, my favorite part of the book Fire and Blood. It's a fantastic vignette of King's Landing life. We get plot, counterplot, politics, the Game of Thrones being played to its absolute zenith. But in all of that, Aegon is hidden away. He hides away in his room. He doesn't want to talk to anyone. He is king in name only. The land is being ruled by the hand of the king, by the regents. The regents keep falling. The hand of the king keeps changing. His own new wife, Geer, dies, apparently committing suicide, allegedly being murdered. And he, we're told, gains no happiness from anything. He has to even be reminded to eat. This is not a happy king. So, during this time, the only person that he seems to allow to get close is this character called Gaiman Palehair, who is very probably, we actually did see him very briefly in So the Dragon. He's the bastard son of Aegon II, who he has a whole great history himself, but Aegon basically takes him on board and says, okay, now you're going to be my friend. And he has these great feelings of affection for him. Then, however, joy of joys, his brother returns. Viserys did not die all that time ago. He, in fact, was over in Lys, and he's got married, and he's returning back. The Lysine Spring is a whole amazing subplot within this whole story. But his brother returns, and suddenly he gets a little degree of joy back into his life. And the two of them, Aegon and Viserys, they are, yes, they have their ups and downs, but they are ruling side by side for the next 20 years. When Fire and Blood finishes, it finishes at a fantastic point, which is the end of the Regency. The two of them, Aegon and Viserys, walk into the small council meeting, and they basically say, hey, anyone know what day this is? Yes, it's your name day. You have come of age. Great. You're all fired. At which point he just takes control. And we don't know exactly what happens after this. What we have in the World of Ice and Fire is about half a page. We get the headlines. The headlines are that he, and we know this bit was just at the very end of Fire and Blood, he marries Geer, who is sort of a distant cousin. Eventually they have 5 children. He starts off hating everything to do with dragons. He doesn't even want any dragon eggs in King's Landing, in the Red Keep. He bans them. And then the dragons die. At the start of his reign, there were only 4 adult live dragons left. Within 20 years, they're all dead. This is why he is called Aegon Dragonbane. Was it his fault? We'll get into that a little bit later. But His reign was a particularly important one because this was the first one when the dragons were no longer there. The Targaryens were ruling not just because they had dragons, but because they were the royal family. And so this was a huge shift. The implication that we have from what we read is that the power behind the throne was Viserys. Viserys was the clever one, the political one, the one who was driving a lot of the policy. We will talk more about him another time, I'm sure. But Aegon, although he came round to this idea eventually that maybe we should try and get the dragons back, that didn't work. And he died relatively young at the age of 36 of, we're told, consumption, at which point he is succeeded by his son Daeron, who becomes Daeron I. So that's his story. He has a whole load of, as I say, really unhappy monikers to him. And it seems that he led, for the most part, a really unhappy life. Certainly his childhood and early teenage years were incredibly traumatic. He did get a little bit of life and hope back to him when his brother Viserys returned, but he didn't seem to take joy in anything. His character, we're told, was, even when later on in life, when perhaps he was king and his brother was there and he was married and he had children, maybe you might expect him to come more out of his shell. Even then, he would head off into his room and not be seen for several days, just seemingly in the pit of depression. He didn't enjoy art, he didn't enjoy song, he didn't enjoy jousts or tourneys. He didn't seem to enjoy spending time with lots of people. He was not a happy king. He was not a happy man. But he is one of the most significant rulers we have because he was this first ruler after the dragons die. Let's have a quick look in the chat. Maura Lee, hi there, Maura, saying, just a show of love and support. Thank you for all you do. Thank you very much for all you do, Maura. I hugely appreciate it. And also there was a super sticker, I think, from you. I'm just flicking back. Yes, thank you very much for that. And Colt Foster saying, so upset I forgot to send a question on Patreon this week, but wanted to say real quick how much I love the work you do. Oh, thank you very much. I think I've listened pretty much every live stream you've done for the past 2 years as I fall asleep. Well, thank you. I hugely appreciate that. Let's just quick flick through the chat for Uzair Ahmed saying, of course, he's kind of going to be sad as his mum got killed in front of him. Yeah, absolutely. Isaac Dean saying, I wonder if they'll go into Aegon's regency in House of the Dragon. My feeling is probably not. They're talking about 4 seasons at the moment, and I think that probably takes us up to the end of the dance. Otto Hightower saying there is no Maester conspiracy, that is all Team Black propaganda. The Maesters are completely unbiased, I assure you. Well, that's definitely what they will want you to think. Igrit Weirwood saying the Maesters killed the dragons at a time when they knew the rulers wouldn't look too hard into the causes and they could write the story with impunity. Well, I don't think I've got a specific question about this. Maybe I have, I can't remember. But we'll get into that in a moment with the Maesters and the death of the dragons, because this is the thing which he is remembered for. This is his legacy. But let's go to a couple of questions from my patrons first. Johnny Sariani saying, hello, Robert. Some what ifs can get a bit crazy, but I thought of one that I'd love to hear your thoughts on. If Rhaenyra had inherited and ruled unchallenged, might her sons of differing parentage begun another version of the dance? In the show, she and her In the show, she and her sons seem to be genuinely decent, at least for now, but the book leaves more to be imagined. Could Daemon perhaps serve a similar role to the Greens and convince his sons to usurp their half-brothers? Well, this is interesting because it is a what if. So again, obviously we don't know we have no categorical answer on this. And in terms of their characters, the characters of Aegon and Viserys as well, we don't have huge amounts of them as adults, nor indeed do we know what Daemon would have been like, obviously, if he'd lived much longer. What we do know is that pretty much every generation of Targaryens had a succession crisis. It was a rare generation of Targaryens that did not have a succession crisis of one kind or another. Aegon the Conqueror claimed the throne by force. The next generation down, Maegor claimed it from Aenys. The next generation down, Jaehaerys claimed it when he definitely wasn't the named heir. The next generation down from that, there was a crisis. Who was he going to be naming as his heir? The next generation down from that, we have Viserys deciding who should be his heir in the Dance of the Dragons, and so on and so on and so on. You go down literally just 2 generations from here, you start getting into the Blackfire rebellions. This is just part of what it's like for the Targaryens to be ruling, is there are always succession crises. So if Rhaenyra had reigned unchallenged, would there have been a challenge against her children? Her children allegedly by Laenor, but probably by Harwin Strong. Well, probably is the short answer. Who would that have come from? Well, probably from the Hightower side. Maybe they didn't. Maybe if they didn't challenge when Rhaenyra took over, the principle would have carried on, and the cloud would have stayed there all the way through until her sons, till Jaehaerys himself took over. That wasn't going to go away. The argument against Rhaenyra being the one to inherit was at least partly based on the fact that her children were not true-born Targaryens. So that argument would still be there if it came down to the next generation. Book Daemon is different from show Daemon. Show Daemon, clearly, his driving force, the ultimate driving force for him, is love of his family, love of Viserys, and love of Rhaenyra. That is what drives him on the show. In the book, that is not at all clear that that's the case. In the book, it seems very clear, to me at least on my reading, that the main driving force for him is seeking power. If you look at any of the major decisions that Daemon took during his life in the book, you see that he took the option that brought him closer to power each and every time. Is that just going to stop? Probably not. Particularly if Rhaenyra did turn away from him, which she does seem to do. Which she definitely seems to do in the Dance of the Dragons, but would she have turned away from him like that if there wasn't a Dance of the Dragons? Perhaps if he had turned away from her, she would probably have turned away from him as well, and maybe he would think that the best way forward would be for his children to be inheriting rather than her children to be inheriting. So I think this is possible. I think this is actually more likely than it probably looks like just on paper. In the book, on the show, they seem a lot closer as a family unit. On the show, Daemon seems a lot more loyal to her. We'll see how that goes in future seasons. But on the show, I think no. But Book Daemon is a lot more mad, bad, and dangerous to know in the book. Diego Godoy, hola. Why do you think Aegon III cared so much about Gaiman Palehair? I'm thinking about the times they would beat Gaiman to make Aegon III follow instructions. Although it sounds cruel, it was Gaiman simply a temporary replacement for his brother Viserys. So the beatings, this is another sad part in the very sad story of Aegon III. Once he is king, he has regents and he has lots of people who are trying very much to have control. The person who is most blatant about this is Unwin Peake. Unwin Peake is a character who, during the Regency, basically tries to grab. He sees his chance, sees his shot at glory, and he tries to grab it with both hands. And there are lots of rumors that perhaps it was him behind the death of Geer, Aegon's first wife. Certainly, he seems to use that as a way to try and push his own daughter as a potential second wife. And he gets his people in position in the most important places, one of which was Master of Arms in King's Landing. The person who was training Aegon to fight, to be a good fighter. This was what lots of kings did. They were expected to, if they weren't the greatest fighter in the land, they were certainly expected to know how to hold a sword properly and how to hold their own in combat. Aegon didn't want to do that. Everything we know about him, he didn't get interested in that. He just wanted to go and sit in his room. And so they were left in this awkward position that they desperately wanted him to be getting this training, for him to be almost kind of knowing his place as well, with somebody teaching him. But they couldn't force him to do that because he's still king. There might be regents ruling in his stead, but he was still king. So they came up with this ingenious, if rather cruel ploy of saying, okay, so who's he friends with? Gaiman Palehair, he's friends with him. And they took him and they made him the whipping boy. Quite literally, when Aegon did something they didn't like, they just whipped Gaiman Palehair because they could do that. And that, because Aegon liked Gaiman, that made Aegon do what they wanted. Now, that's harsh and that's cruel. The bigger question here, though, is what was that relationship like? Clearly, he did find some sort of a kindred spirit. Gaiman Palehair was almost certainly bastard-born son of Aegon II, and was then used in the very end of the Dance of the Dragons, near the very end. After Rhaenyra gets run out of the capital, we get this Moon of the Three Kings, this time where King's Landing, there are 3 hills in King's Landing. On each of the hills, there was somebody declaring themselves to be the ruler of the city, none of which were the main candidates. One was this Gaiman Palehair, who had been taken by the people of Flea Bottom, particularly the sex workers, and they said, okay, this is our true king. Here's his set of decrees. He will be ruling from now on. Now, if you read that set of decrees, actually, they seem probably some of the most sensible and grounded policies you'll find anywhere in Fire and Blood. That seems to be actually pretty sensible and good, but obviously they couldn't allow a bastard-born child who is being put forward by sex workers to be the true king. And so when Aegon II comes in, and then the powers that be return to King's Landing, he gets washed aside. All of his supporters basically get flogged or killed or punished in some way. He, however, does get spared. He does get spared Aegon II. Aegon III wants him spared, and he takes pity on him. Now, why? I think he saw a kindred spirit. He saw somebody who had lost his parents, somebody, as of course Aegon himself had, somebody who'd been used by other people, who had been creating him as this figurehead of a king, but actually as other people deciding his fate. I think he saw somebody who'd been through very similar experiences to him, who actually seemed to be quite nice and had no particular ambitions of his own. And that created a bond. Now, the specific question about whether this is a temporary replacement for his brother Viserys, he thought his brother Viserys was dead. So he wasn't thinking this is a temporary replacement. But psychologically, was it? Probably. Aegon needed a friend. He needed somebody there. He'd lost everyone. He'd lost not just his brother, but his 3 half-brothers as well. Anyone who he might count as being a peer had gone. His entire family pretty much had been wiped out. And here is the last person who could perhaps understand even something of what he'd been going through. So, yes, is the short answer. I think he was a replacement. When Viserys came back, he was slightly put to one side, and he was no longer in the closest inner circle. And he did have a tragic death as well. Unfortunately, gave him pale hair. But yeah, he was what Aegon needed at the time, and frankly, he needed a friend. Sydney, the romantic Taylor, hi there, saying, I think of any, let me start again. I think of any other major house, if any other major house had been ruling Westeros, their reign would be similar to House Targaryens, because the line of succession always led to wars, just like in real history, the British royal families. Yes, I mean, I'm not saying by any stretch of the imagination that this did not happen in other royal families, but I think in Westeros either. But I think certainly in Westeros it's noticeable the Targaryens had more of this kind of stuff than any of the other reigning families. Now, why that was, I mean, you can speculate. There's certainly something dragonish about them. You're a conqueror, not a ruler kind of idea. That's definitely a part of it. There's definitely a part that they thought of themselves as being superior, different, definitely, to everyone else in the continent. The doctrine of exceptionalism that Jaehaerys came up with. So with the Targaryens, this seems to happen even more than it did with other ruling families. But yes, they're definitely, you're completely right. They're definitely not alone in having a lot of succession crises. Sydney Taylor saying, I wasn't trying to be smart. Sorry if you came in. Did not at all. Do not worry. No, I was... I would agree. Carson Page also agreeing it happens all the time in history. Marty Dodger saying, I think there is something to be said about how the first generation of Targs born after the dance turned hardcore to the faith. Well, it's Baelor did. Baelor, the Blessed, one of Aegon's sons, who did rule for a little while. After him, he definitely got hardcore of the faith, but not all of them. It's probably fair to say. Egret Weirwood saying George R. R. Martin always does a good job of juxtaposing. I'm getting my words all wrong today. Juxtaposing who would have power next to who should have power. Yes, so it's quite interesting the way he often does that. In the main A Song of Ice and Fire story, the biggest example he's got going on of this is Aegon VI, or Fagon, as we often know him as, young Griff. He seems to be potentially a really good ruler. He has had everything that you would want from a good ruler in that time and period. He spent time with the small folk. He understood the needs of ordinary people. He was learned. He seemed to care about people, and he seemed to be a leader. And all of these things seem to put him in quite good light. And the bits of foreshadowing that we seem to see do imply that probably he will be well liked when he gets to Westeros and presumably rules for a short period of time. So he's being held up as being this potentially good ruler, but is he actually who he claims to be? Is he really the rightful ruler? And I think George R. R. Martin wants us to be asking this question: does it matter? Does it actually matter? I don't think he's going to create, don't get me wrong, I don't think he's going to create Fagon as being this perfect paradigm of wonder. But I think that he is going to show him in contrast to some of the other rulers and leaders of the time. Certainly we had Joffrey. Cersei is going to be largely in control. And then we're going to see Daenerys arrive, and the contrasts with all of those different characters will be absolutely fascinating. He is building him up to be a contrast, and what we have here with Gaiman Palehair is a contrast. He is a different character, a different person to Aegon. Had he ruled, would he have been a good ruler? I think we're left to kind of speculate that. Zach K saying you made it to another stream. Hi there, great to see you. Welcome. Urias Tosh saying his name is Aegon VI, the one true king of Westeros and good lad. He ties his own shoes, cleans his own clothes, lives with the poor and wipes his own arse. And he's a good lad. Well, he does seem to be a good lad. That's the point I'm trying to make. Aranabe Mitra saying much love to you, Robert, and the legendary mods. Yes. If you are watching this live, please do show a little bit of love to the moderators. They go over and above the Call of Duty. They do fantastic work. So please do show them a little bit of love in the chat. What's your opinion of A World of Ice and Fire stating that an older Aegon III's mind changed regarding dragons? GGMU. Yeah, absolutely GGMU. So we get, as I say, just about half a page in The World of Ice and Fire about his reign and rule. We're told very clearly the first half of his reign, understandably, everybody seems to understand it as far as we can tell from the text. He hated dragons. He saw his own mother eaten by a dragon. Of course, he's going to hate dragons. He was just, and he got all dragon eggs banned from the Red Keep, which apparently led to a little rift with his brother Viserys, the only serious rift which we ever saw. However, he became, and I wish I could remember the exact wording now, he became convinced of the fact that they would be useful for keeping people in order. And as a result, what he did was he agreed to what Viserys suggested, which is to get a whole load of these magicians over from, I think it was a Shy, to try and get some dragon eggs hatched, some more dragons. But that ended in, I think, again, the exact wording is something like failure and debacle. It's something like that, which is like, so what actually happened? The feel of that is very similar to what we had with Aegon V, Egg, much later. He also got some pyromancers from a Shy and brought them all over and tried to hatch some dragon eggs. But the overall impression we get is not that Aegon suddenly was converted personally to the need to to have dragons. He didn't like dragons, but he suddenly realized that it was good for Targaryen rule for them to have dragons as a concept, which kind of ties him in a little bit here with Viserys, King Viserys, who the first, who we know from House of the Dragon. And there is a link there, which is that I said when I was talking through about Viserys a few weeks ago, that he's the only real example of somebody who survives his dragon, and so we don't really know what, and he decides not to take another dragon. Is that what people do when they survive their dragon? There's obviously a nuance on that, which is there are another couple of clear examples of people who survive their dragon, one of them which is Aegon II, who we were looking at last time. The other one is Aegon III, who we're looking at this time. Aegon II, he lost his dragon, but it was really only a matter of a few months or a year that he was still alive for after that. Aegon III, there was never really an option for him to have another dragon after that, so we don't know, but he was traumatized and never specifically wanted to ride another dragon himself afterwards. So he seems to be in the same kind of boat where, reading between the lines, he wanted dragons presumably for his children to be able to ride because he thought this was good for Targaryen rule. What changed his mind? I can think of only two things. The first is obviously the dragons died out, so there were no war dragons. And I think the lack of dragons probably showed him the fragility of Targaryen rule. And the second thing is probably there were occasions, or at least an occasion, where he had opposition and it would have been very useful for him to have a dragon. Now, we're not told huge amounts, but we are told that there were several pretenders during his reign who claimed to be Deeren, one of the children of King Viserys, or the youngest child of King Viserys, and Alicent, who we didn't see in House of the Dragon because he was down being a squire in Old Town in season 1. Season 2, we will see him. I am reliably informed because he's got an important role. In season 2 onwards, he should be on his dragon to Saurion. He should be there in the vanguard of the Hightower army, effectively, slowly heading across the continent towards King's Landing. Now, he dies in combat, and but they never found his body. And so this led to people claiming to be him. Now, it's entirely possible that one of those people managed to get, it wasn't just him just suddenly turning up and saying, oh, hi, by the way, I'm your long lost family member. Maybe one of them managed to get an army behind them, managed to actually try and take on Targaryen rule. And maybe the Targaryens in power, Aegon and Viserys, realized this would be a whole lot easier if they had a dragon, because all they would have to do was just get on top of their dragon, fly out, and then burn the army. That's what everybody else had done in the previous generations of Targaryens, but they could not do that. That would be a persuasive argument for why you should try and get dragons back. So that's quite a long-winded answer to your question, but I think that the fundamental point is I don't think he personally had a change of heart about dragons. I don't think he personally wanted another dragon. I think that he thought that the Targaryen family as a whole would be better served if they had dragons going forward. Question from Martin S. saying, prior to the Targaryen conquest, were wars between the various kingdoms of Westeros frequent? Were succession wars or other civil wars within these same kingdoms common? Yes, they were. So if you go back, well, George R. R. Martin talks about a time of 1,000 kingdoms. If you go right back to like the Age of Heroes, for example, the Starks, just to take one part of the Seven Kingdoms, the Starks, when they were founded, they didn't start out as being the rulers of all of the North. They had lots of other kingdoms that they needed to fight. And so we learn about these one after another, all of these different kingdoms that they managed to either kill off or force out or force to bend the knee. And it was only after hundreds, thousands of years of struggle that they were the kings of winter over all of the North. So that happened in different ways in lots of the rest of Westeros. What you will find, though, is that the ruling families of the biggest houses broadly stayed the same through the period. The Hightowers stayed the same through the period. The Starks stayed the same during the period. You had the handover from the Castlys to the Lannisters, but then the Lannisters stayed there. The Gardeners stayed where they were, and so on. And the Durrandons stayed where they were, and so on and so on, through thousands of years. Now, they may well have had battles between various branches of the family, but it was to take on the title of the family. So, were there wars and battles? Yes, all the way through history. Civil wars within the same kingdoms, succession wars, definitely. What we don't have is a list of every single one that happened, because this goes back into the mists of time. Where we started off was with 1,000 small kingdoms. By the time we get up to the conquest, we can be talking about 7 kingdoms, because they have coalesced into much larger kingdoms by that point. Andrew K saying the difference is the Targs seem to have much more infighting. Pre-unification was more houses constantly vying for power between them. Yeah, I mean, I think I'd agree. So the Targaryens definitely had infighting, and it's whereas you would get, and I think this is the point you're trying to make, for example, House Bracken and House Blackwood were at war with each other on and off for thousands of years. The Targaryens during their reign were basically at war with each other. So that's the biggest difference. Reflective rambling, picking up a question for Ranabir Mitra. I love it. Thank you very much. When people do this, very kind. Saying, I believe there is a link between the Shy Mages event going south and Aegon dying by TB. Yeah, consumption is what we're told. Tuberculosis is what the modern translation often is. Looking west in the direction of the Citadel. Yeah, so we don't know, and this is one of the many questions that we have when it comes to Aegon III. It's definitely not the same kind of thing that happened as with Aegon V. I said there are echoes, which there definitely are, of getting the mages in from the east and trying to hatch dragon eggs, but their deaths are different. Aegon died in the inferno that followed a failed magical attempt to hatch dragon eggs. Aegon III seems to have died from, as you say, TB, consumption. He looked really old at the time. It was more like a long illness. He didn't look after himself. He didn't eat well. He didn't drink. He didn't go out and have fun. He hardly went outside at all. He didn't get much sunlight or vitamin D. So none of this is a huge surprise, but we are told in the World of Ice and Fire that people were surprised he was only 36, because he appeared a lot older than that. Let's have a quick flick through, make sure I've not missed any other questions. Elfie Rivers saying, just to say thanks. I've been here since Game of Thrones season 6. Wow, it's a long time. Thank you so much. I hugely appreciate that. AK Channel TV said, saying, did Daemon name him Aegon with plans to diss Jace? The suggestion is that he was named Aegon with plans to diss the other Aegon. So certainly that's how Team Green took it. They had their Aegon, who was there as their heir. They were putting there as their candidate. And then Daemon and Rhaenyra named their firstborn son between the two of them Aegon. And it's like, hang on a moment, that's our son's name. You've just named him the same as our son. Yes, they called lots of children Aegon, but not normally in the same generation. So that was certainly, it was taken as an insult by Team Green, because it was like, oh, is that a diss against us? And it probably was, to be honest, it probably was. So we often, those of us who read Fire and Blood rather than going first to House of the Dragon, I think instinctively we try and we're more Team Black than Team Green. Team Green, certainly in the book, they were launching a coup. Team Black were in the right. Not that they were all great or perfect, but Team Black did do some things which were deliberately provocative to Team Green as well, and this is one of them. Quick flick through. Okay, I think that's it in the chat. Oh, question from Chelsea Oliver saying, would you agree Aegon III is a Henry VII type figure, someone who wasn't necessarily destined to be king, brought up in wartime and marrying someone from the other side to bring peace? Yeah, definitely that's the kind of feel we've got going on here. Certainly the end of this kind of end of the Wars of the Roses feel to this marriage between the two sides, between Aegon III and Jaehaera. That's the idea, is that the continent was on its knees after all this warfare, and so we get increasingly, and I hope they show this on House of the Dragon, increasingly towards the end of the war, we get these sort of older, wiser heads, perhaps we might call them, people who seem to start to grow weary of the war. People like Corlys Velaryon. Larys Strong appears to be there in the book. Probably won't be on the show, but they seem to just go, okay, well, what do we have to do to end this war? And one of the parts of that solution is to marry together the two halves. And so the marriage pact between the two, between Aegon III and Jaehaera, actually came before Aegon II was killed. The idea was that the agreement would be that those two would inherit after Aegon II. He wasn't very happy about this, but he had to play along because of the powers that be at the time. So, just wanting to go back to the question: is he sort of a Henry VII figure who wasn't necessarily destined to be king, brought up in wartime and marrying someone from the other side to bring peace? Yeah, he would not, when he was being brought up, he would not have been brought up thinking he was going to be king. He would probably be thinking at the when he was born, and all the way for the first 9-10 years of his life, he will have been, in his mind, fifth in line. First of all, his mother, then he's got 3 older stepbrothers, and then it would be him. And by the time he grew up, probably his stepbrothers would also have children as well, so he'd fall even further down the line of succession. So he would not have been brought up thinking that he was going to be king. It was only really towards the end of the Dance of the Dragons, when Joffrey, at the storming of the Dragon Pit, when Joffrey dies, that's the point at which he became the heir, in his understanding of it at least, which does add to this question that we've come at from lots of different angles about, if we take what it says in the show with this great prophecy, the Song of Ice and Fire, which has been passed down. Jaehaerys passed it down to Viserys. Viserys passed it down to Rhaenyra. Who's Rhaenyra going to be passing this down to? Well, she seems to have told her husband now, Daemon. We didn't see her say it to Jaehaerys before he went off. But will she say it once everybody else is dead? Will she say it to Aegon III before she dies? There's only a short period of time, and she's traumatized, and he's traumatized, and he's very young. There's a fair chance that she might not. If we're looking for a gap during the Dance of the Dragons, that is the most obvious time when there would be a gap where the prophecy was not passed down one person to another. Jay Sheth saying, if Aegon had recovered a little, he would have been the king to bring Dawn into the realm without bloodshed before Daeron the Good did. Possibly. So we get... So his son, Daeron I, was the person who invaded Dawn. The Targaryens have sort of left it alone. There were a few little battles and forays to and fro over the years, but after Aegon had basically signed that peace accord, they'd given up on this idea of taking Dawn. Would Aegon III have done it? Again, this is something we will find out in Fire and Blood. I suspect because Daeron got this idea from somewhere. Daeron, he inherits and immediately goes, right, I'm invading Dawn. Where did that idea come from? Was it from his dad? It's entirely possible. But I don't get the impression that Aegon III was his focus. From what we've read, his focus was on expanding the kingdom. I think probably it was on keeping hold of what they've got already. And once it had survived, then Daeron went off and took Dawn. But it was really only later even than that, with Daeron II, that we properly get Dawn coming into the Seven Kingdoms. So I think I will disagree. I don't think he would have done that. But it's hard to say because of the fact you say if he'd recovered a little, then unless you're talking about Aegon II there, I don't know. Either way, their characters were both of them, their characters were so traumatized by what happened in the Dance of the Dragons that I think it's hard to think about either of their characters without engaging with that. Ranabir Mitra saying, didn't yet see your thoughts on the Duncan Egg show. I'm so excited to see the man, the myth, the legend, and my best friend, Lord Bloodraven. Yeah, absolutely. Wow, Bloodraven is finally going to be appearing on our screens. Yeah, I will talk about that a little bit towards the end of the live stream. I talked about it towards the end of the last live stream if you want some more in-depth thoughts. But yes, just on the Bloodraven thing, we should definitely be seeing Bloodraven, if not in season 1, then in season 3 perhaps, which will be amazing. Interestingly, and this is a fun thing, I'll do a video on this at some point. There are quite a few random characters that, and feel free to speculate in the chat, I counted 7 off the top of my head, there may be even more, random characters that we see and meet during A Song of Ice and Fire, who we will also potentially see and meet in Dunk and Egg. Some of which will be in the first few stories. So Blood Raven's your starter there. There are others. So if you're in the chat, I'll come back and see where you got to on that in a few minutes. But yeah, there are definitely some characters that we will see, because the time frame or the lifespan of Dunk and Egg obviously is significant, and it takes us up to the older characters in A Song of Ice and Fire we might meet when they're even younger. Let's go to Holly. Hobby is saying you like Aegon III. I wouldn't say I like him. I think I have sympathy for him. I think he suffered so many people during the Dance of the Dragon, suffered great horrors, and he did. So I feel my heart goes out to him. Johnny Targs saying, hello, Robert. How do you think the show will handle Aegon III's age? In the show, he's only a few years old. Am I misremembering his age in the book, or wasn't he a little bit older? So I sort of touched on this a moment ago, but the answer is yes. The show have done, and they've changed a few of the ages. But this one is, for the most part, not significant, but there will be one thing, I think, which might make a difference. So he is in the book, he's about 10, maybe 9 or 10 when the war breaks out. On the show, I mean, your guess is as good as mine, but he's somewhere 3, 4, 5, something around that age, so significantly younger. Now, for the most part, in the grand arc, I don't think this matters. I don't think this makes a huge amount of difference, because when at the end of all of this, when he is made king, and I think this is probably roughly when it will end at the Hour of the Wolf, the point is that he's still a child. He's not of age. So whether he's 6 years old or 11 or 12 years old, I don't think makes a huge difference for that. But there is one point where I think this could make a big difference, which is that moment, which for him is a huge character moment, when he's being taken away from the war on the boat to Essos, and it gets attacked, and he climbs onto his dragon and flies back to Dragonstone, thinking that he's abandoned his brother, and his dragon was injured during the flight and dies. Now, that, if you're imagining an 11-year-old doing that you kind of understand it. But if we've got just a 4-year-old, that's a very different vibe to what's going on there. So is it possible? Are they going to do it? Maybe. But I think that front, an 11-year-old getting traumatized by making an active decision to go off, as opposed to, you would expect a child that young, if they do escape in that way, it's more a matter of somebody making them, saying, you go, you do this now. So that would be quite, for character development, I think that would be quite a significant difference. Let's just have a quick flick through. I sort of challenged the chat to see who else is going to be, which characters from A Song of Ice and Fire are going to be in Dunk and Egg when it comes. Bloodraven, Maester Aemon says, Ranabir Mitra, yes, definitely. He's definitely going to be there. He's not directly appeared in any of the stories yet, but he is Egg's older brother and his closest sibling. So he's around. Old Nan says, Ava Gibson, yes, almost certainly she's going to be there in the half-written story. He's not finished it yet, with the working title She-Wolves of Winterfell. The hints are that maybe there might even be a little bit of a dalliance between her and Dunk. So Old Nan we will definitely see. I think I saw somebody mention Walder Frey. Yes, a small snivelling Walder Frey will definitely appear. Yeah, I think those are. I think you've got the main ones. There will, if we're going to see later on, Princess Scarlet 2 saying Bittersteel, Shira Seastar. Yeah, if they take the stories further, then we will probably see them as well. But we also might see a few, if we take it right up to the end and the death of Duncan Egg, we're then starting to see a few of the characters that we know, the older characters in the Song of Ice and Fire when they were young, were around at that point. So we will start seeing Aerys, for example, the Mad King. We might well see Tywin Lannister. We might well see so Barristan, characters like that we will start to see in their much younger selves if they take this all the way up to the end of Duncan Egg. So yeah, absolutely fascinating. Some of the characters who could potentially be appearing. Let's go, actually, just roughly halfway through every live stream, I'm always trying to do this. 3 things. The first thing, important announcement, if you enjoy these live streams, as of next week, these live streams will be appearing on my second channel, not this channel, on my other channel, IDG Live. There is a link down in the description. There will be a link. I'm sure that one of the moderators will put it in the chat. If you're watching this live, there are links all over the place, but it's IDG Live. That is where I'm going to be doing all of my live content, not just these live streams, also short form content, interviews with people, a lot of really exciting stuff I've got going on over there. So please, 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 if you'd like to carry on watching these live streams, do go and check out IDG Live. Secondly, patrons, thank you. I cannot do what I do without your support. That's why I frame these live streams around your questions. That will carry on even when we're doing it on the other channel. Do not worry about that. And moderators, I've already said thank you to you, but always can do another thanks. Question from Martin S. Are agricultural conditions, as it were, much worse in the north than in lands further south, such as the Reach? Are harvests per land area a lot smaller? It would seem so. Well, yes, is the shortest answer. The Reach is basically the garden of the 7 kingdoms. This is the most fertile land. This is where most of the foodstuffs come from. If you go to the Vale of Arryn, the actual Vale itself, a lot of it is mountainous, but the actual Vale itself is a few miles wide and very long. That is hugely fertile as well. The rest, though, the Riverlands is good farmland. The Westerlands is quite mountainous. Dawn is very hot, so you just get things that grow well in hot weather. The north is very cold a lot of the time. What you do get, one of the small things I love about Winterfell as a castle, is because they've got these hot springs which come up from underground. They have got the glass gardens. They've got this place where they can grow things all year round in warm temperatures, even when the snow's falling outside. But generally speaking, no, in the north, when it's winter, snow everywhere. It's during the summer months, yes, you can farm, but it's the much lusher land is to the south. Sebastian Holden saying, hello, Robert, you have the best mods. I do. Absolutely, I agree 100%. Carson Page saying, do you think George has told them for the show what happens at the fire? If you're talking about the tragedy at Summerhall, no, not yet. I don't think so. They're still drafting season 1, so I think they're a long way away from that. his intention, take this how you wish, but his intention is always to stay ahead of the show. He said this with Game of Thrones, obviously, but I think it's easier to do this if you're just trying to write novellas. But his intention is to keep the Duncan Egg stories going ahead of the show, so be publishing things ahead of it, so he would not need to tell them. He would not need to have that sit down. The reason why he had the sit down with the showrunners of Game of Thrones between season 4 and 5, which is, for those of us who've been in the nerdy community here for a while, is quite legendary because of what he may or may not have said to them. That was a big handover meeting which lasted a few days. There were two reasons. The first reason is that he was taking a step back. He had been actively involved in seasons 1 to 4. He had written an episode per season. From season 5, he took an active step back. And secondly, he was starting to realize that he probably wouldn't be able to stay ahead of the show right to the end. So he had to tell them what was coming. Contrary to that, his intention for Duncan Egg is to stay ahead. Question from George R.R. Tolkien saying, salutations, Robert. Salutations to you too, sir. I was just wondering if you thought anything suspicious of Aegon III's death. It seems like a lot of people were eager to see him off the throne. I don't suspect Viserys II, though. He actually seems like a pretty decent person. Who gains most from his death? Was it suspicious? We're only given a bit of a hint in the Winds of Ice, the World of Ice and Fire. That's me desperately wanting to see Winds of Winter. The World of Ice and Fire, where we get this sort of line saying, and people were a bit surprised that he wasn't a bit older because he looked a lot older than he was, but we haven't got, and we won't get until Fire and Blood Part 2, we haven't got anything that appears suspicious there other than that line. So who benefits? His sons, I guess. Deeron I. We don't know enough about Deeron. Viserys was his Hand of the King and carried on being Hand of the King through this time, so he doesn't seem to change in status at all. As it stands, I don't think there's anything particularly suspicious here. Sometimes people just die, and as I say, he appears not to have been particularly looking after himself, so yeah, it kind of makes sense. Maura Lee saying, hi there, Maura, saying, how successful was he in keeping the kingdom united? Well, this I think is the crux of the matter, because he's not viewed well by history. He's not viewed well because it was on his watch that the dragons died out. But I do think this is fundamentally bad, and we do not yet know how hard it was. It might not have been that hard. It might have been very hard. We'll find out in Fire and Blood Part 2. But keeping the kingdom together was very important because they no longer had the dragons. There was clearly enough of a challenge from someone for him to realize the importance of dragons and the need for dragons. So there must have been at least some challenge to him. To what extent was he actively responsible for that? It's not 100% clear. Viserys seems to have been the person who'd been driving a lot of this. So until we get more information on this, my instinct is to say he did have an important role as a figurehead, but probably it wasn't down to him that the Seven Kingdoms stayed together. Certainly, there was a double-edged sword for him in terms of the wider leadership within the Seven Kingdoms, which is when he inherited the leaders of the lords of the other main houses were mostly children, even younger than him. They were unprepared. The Starks, they'd just gone up. Winter was happening up there. They weren't coming back down again for a while. But then House Lannister, the Arryns were having civil wars. Most of the main houses, the Tullys, they had young, inexperienced leadership at this time. So that was good in as much as none of these other houses were about to rise up against him. But also it was bad in that he couldn't be relying on any strong allies outside of King's Landing. So I think it was probably a hard job, but I don't think we can give him the credit for it. Carl Karsnark saying Balrog Wings is the name of Robert's double super secret channel. That's definitely no. Balrog Wings do not exist. Therefore, I do not have a second super secret channel. I do have another channel called The Well Told Tale, which, if you wish to go and check that out, you're more than welcome. But it's nothing to do with Balrog Wings. 444. Saying, hi Robert, do you think that we should blame only the maesters for killing dragon eggs? Or was there possibly some kind of cooperation from Aegon III, even in the form of willful blindness? What about the remaining living dragons? Do you think that Aegon III took any actions against them, or his Dragonbane, or was his Dragonbane nickname not entirely justly attached to him? So, this is the key part of his reign, and it's the key mystery that we do not know. It's the big thing which George R. R. Martin kind of dangled before us at the end of Fire and Blood Part 1 as like, yep, and then the dragons all died, but that's a tale for another time kind of thing. What we know is there are two parts to this. There's the dragon eggs. Dragon eggs suddenly stopped hatching healthy dragons. That's the first part of the equation. The second part of the equation is that at the end of the Dance of the Dragons, there were only 4 adult living dragons left. And they were scattered around the continent. And within 20 years, they had all died. So what can we attach blame for either of these things to Aegon III? Let's do the dragon eggs first. My theory, not just my theory, many people have this theory, is that this was the maesters. I'd already talked about the lack of leadership more broadly in the realm. The leadership vacuum during the last part of the regency was filled by the maesters, particularly Grand Maester Muncan, who for a 6 to 9 month period was, without any exaggeration, the most powerful figure that Westeros has ever known. He was the king himself was staying in his room, not getting involved in anything. Muncan was King's Regent, the only King's Regent, so was acting as king. He was also hand of the king at the same time, so he was doing all of those things too. There was no small council at the time. He was the small council, so he was doing things that he wanted to in the name of the king without having to consult anyone else. And he also had control of the Maester communication network, and all of the major houses were not really paying much attention to what was going on right then. He had all of the power wrapped up in his office, and he could do what he wanted. And we know that the Maesters don't like magic and dragons, so would they be able to go and kill living dragons? Probably not. But would they be able to poison dragon eggs? Yes, absolutely. Particularly given the fact that King Aegon had banned them from the Red Keep. They weren't even being held anywhere where there was where the Targaryens were being sort of their home base anymore. Dragonstone was just, that had passed through so many different hands that there was nobody really looking after it at that point. Could they have poisoned them? Absolutely, 100%. I don't think that was anything to do with Aegon III, but he probably, if he'd been more proactive during that time, perhaps he could have seen a few things that were going on. Perhaps he could have done something about it. But he was still a child, and he was still traumatized by the death of his mother and all of his siblings and absolutely everything that just happened. So I think we can go easy on him. The 4 dragons that were left, is that down to him? Well, one of the 4 dragons is Cannibal. We don't know what happened to Cannibal. We do know that Cannibal was probably very, very old and hadn't really come out during the Dance of the Dragons when we might expect Cannibal to appear at some point. So probably Cannibal died quite soon after that, of old age, in the same way that we get Balerion the Black Dread died of old age. So I don't think we can blame that on him. There were 2 dragons, Silverwing and Sheepstealer, who had been involved in the Dance of the Dragons and had just flown off to different places. Sheepstealer was with Nettles, had gone into the Mountains of the Moon, and people tried to get close. Dragon just burned them and flew away. That dragon was not getting involved in anything. How Sheepstealer could have died is a mystery. We don't know that, but certainly there seems to be no indication that it lived for more than 20 more years, which you'd expect is not a normal lifespan. So probably something happened there. Silverwing flies over to an island in the middle of Red Lake and basically, as far as we can tell, just sort of pines away and probably dies again of natural causes. Silverwing was not a very old dragon, but quite an old dragon by that point. Which leaves just one more. Morning, who had been born during the Dance of the Dragons. Now, we don't know what happened there. And this is probably the biggest mystery of all of them. We can sort of say, well, the other 3 dragons, at least 2 of them probably died of old age. Sheepstealer, I mean, maybe somebody just sort of got lucky and killed it. Maybe it too just decided to fly off and never come back. Who knows? But Morning is different. That feels to me like it might be an event that we're going to be reading about in Fire and Blood Part 2. But when we've got all of these things, are any of those things Aegon III's fault? I don't think we can say they're his fault. Probably we could say he could have done some more to try and keep the dragons alive. He didn't seem to, until later on in his reign, he certainly didn't do any proactive, hey, let's get some dragon eggs and put them with my children and try and hatch them. And he didn't do any of that business. So there was not a proactive trying to get new dragons born. But again, that wasn't something that they needed to worry about. Dragons for the previous few decades, they'd just been born naturally. They just happened, dragons. It's not, they didn't seem to need to do things in particular. They would just say, another dragon has hatched. And this just seems to happen. So he probably didn't think he needed to do anything. So if we add all of it together, is it an unfair thing to blame him for the death of the dragons? Well, yes. But he could have done more. Undoubtedly, he could have done more. Can we blame him for not doing more? Yes. But at the same time, we have to understand that there are huge mitigating reasons why not. he'd seen his own mother eaten by a dragon. He didn't want more dragons. So this kind of boils down to, it's the classic kind of George R. R. Martin thing, which is that, yes, you can blame him. Yes, he probably did deserve the nickname, but you kind of feel sorry for him as well. Kristimir Rakov saying, is it implied that Aegon III had mental health issues as a result of being born from incest? I don't think that's implied any more than for any other Targaryen. He did, I mean, the clear implication is he had some kind of post-traumatic stress going on. He certainly, a lot of what we read about sounds sort of quite classical depression, when he would seem to gain no pleasure from lots of things out in the world. He would go and just not want to leave his room for days on end. He would have to be prompted even to eat. That kind of thing we can probably sort of diagnose from sort of a more modern perspective. But no, I don't think there's an implication that any of this, any more than for any other Targaryen, was as a result of his parentage. Brothers Kryn, hi there, saying, which would you prefer, a Regency series or season, or one dedicated to the Blackfyre Rebellions? That's an unfair question. I want them both. At the moment, I'll do a slightly cheeky cop out of this. At the moment, I would prefer a Regency one, because we have the story there. When we get Fire and Blood Part 2, fingers crossed that we ever do, when we do get Fire and Blood Part 2, then I would love to have that as well. But my feeling at the moment is the same as where they seem to be going at the moment with the spin-offs, is that I would much rather to have ones where George R. R. Martin has already written the stuff, and we'll go from there. So at the moment, he's written about the Regency, so I'd like a season on that. In the future, I want him to have written about the Blackfyre Rebellion, so I'd have it then. Callie Summers saying, if you want to make Robert answer your crazy theories every week, join his Patreon. I didn't start the Balrog Wings discussion this time, by the way. No, well done. Your self-restraint is noted, and hat tip to you, Callie. But thank you very much. Did you send? I'm not sure if I saw if you sent me a crazy theory this week. I maybe just missed the cutoff. But anyway, let's go to 444 also asked whether I think the Seven Kingdoms would be in better shape if Aegon III died young enough not to have any issue, and Viserys II took the reign directly after him, which is fascinating, because we have two very clear and strong directions that were taken by his two sons. Daeron I said, right, we're attacking Dawn now. And then we have Baelor, he said, right, now we're all going to worship the faith of the Seven, and we're going to say sorry to Dawn for all of the nasty things we ever did to them. And then Viserys took over. So would it have been better if Viserys had taken over? I think it would have led to more stability. The biggest, in the long run, the biggest shift was what happened with Baelor. Because what happened with Baelor was that it brought the faith of the Seven away from, and this is kind of geopolitical stuff, away from Old Town, and brought its base of operations into King's Landing, which became hugely important, because all three, up until that point, you get House Hightower, the Maesters, the Faith, all wrapped up in that one place. And then now they've been brought over, the Faith has been brought over, so the High Septon, the head of the Faith, is a lot more focused in on the politics and the royal family and things like that. So the potential for them to be opposing the Targaryens was reduced. That does also mean, when we get to A Song of Ice and Fire, of course, that their base of operations is suddenly in King's Landing, and that has its own problems. But that's for another time, perhaps. The what happened with Deeron was a short-term thing. It had lots of implications in the short term, but it was relatively swiftly turned around, and Deeron II brought to them in anyway. Question from Kristamir Rakov saying, question from Uzziah Ahmed. Thank you very much for picking up a question for someone else. Who would you cast for the roles of Dunk and Egg? Yeah, I asked these. I covered this last time. My general take is I've gone around in circles a lot on casting for Dunk and Egg, and I've come to the conclusion I actually want completely new people I've never heard of before. Egg in particular should be young, and when we get to actually filming this, because this is still a long way away, we shouldn't sort of try and imagine this is going to happen next year. That for general reference, there was an 18-month gap between House of the Dragon being greenlit and it's starting filming, and then filming was another 10 months on top of that. So that was and then you had, I don't know, 6-7 months of post-production. So if this appears before 3 years, then that will be a very good turnaround time, let's put it that way. And because Egg should be quite young, I think this should be somebody that I haven't heard of yet. Dunk, I'm very happy to see what people suggest. I think if this was a few years ago, I think I would have loved, and I always forget the name of the actor, Tom someone, I think, who was Dickon in Game of Thrones, and then he's been in Umbrella Academy. Really tall guy, really built, and I think that he could carry that kind of Dunk simplicity really well. So but I think he's now probably slightly too old. Very happy for any suggestions otherwise, but my instinct is I quite like new people. The casting team have generally done really well. If you think all the way through Game of Thrones and then into House of the Dragon, I don't think they've done a dud casting yet. It's been incredibly high quality. Question from Tom Hopper, Reflective Rambling. Yes, that's his name. But yeah, as Cloaked One, as you say, I think he might now be too old for young Dunk. I think that's my concern. Yeah, he was in Black Sails as well, which is excellent TV show. I do check that out. Let's go to a question from Alison saying, hello, Robert. How do you think Jaehaera died? This is the first wife of Aegon III. I'm interested to hear if you think it was suicide or something else. Tinfoil theories welcome. Well, I don't think this is a huge tinfoil theory. This is something which was mentioned in Fire and Blood. This was during the Regency. We get the Targaryens are at their weakest. He is not a powerful king. He has got regents there who are basically plotting to take power from him. We get Unwin Peake, who as Hand of the King is basically shooting his shot. He wants to be the most. He sees House Peake as being as his glory before him. He sees them as being there at the top table. And he starts putting his people in positions of authority. He puts his people into the Kingsguard. He stacks his people into the Gold Cloaks, into a small council. He's making sure he's well positioned. But the way to keep control, as we saw from the Hightowers just a few years earlier, you marry your daughter into the royal family. And Viserys has a wife, Aegon has a wife, but perhaps, just perhaps, we could get rid of Aegon's wife. She falls from a window of Maegor's Holdfast. It's called. She was also hugely traumatized by what happened in the Dance of the Dragons, and so it was called suicide. But the thinking was that the guard who was guarding the door to her room was one of the loyalists, one of the Unwind Peak loyalists. Surely he could have either done it himself or let someone else in. What is suspicious is the speed with which Unwind Peak then immediately says, "Wow, she's dead. You need another wife. Oh, here's my daughter." That it just stinks in a really suspicious way. So, yeah, I don't think it's particularly tinfoil because it's written down there in front of us in Fire and Blood as one of the key options, but it just kind of makes sense. Let's have a quick flick through to a question from Maura Lee was asking about Aegon's legacy and how that contributed to future wars like the Blackfire Rebellion. Well, the legacy at a very high level is that the Seven Kingdoms survived, which how much of that was down to him, we don't know, but that is definitely his legacy. However, from his line, we do get Daemon Blackfire, because although both of his sons died without children, he did have a daughter, and that daughter became the lover of Aegon IV, and their child was Daemon Blackfire. So it's part of his legacy that, although he may have played his part in saving the Seven Kingdoms, also coming from him was the roots of the next massive Targaryen civil war. By the Cloaked One, great to see you. Question from Catherine Furseth saying, I wonder which, if any, characteristics you can see that Aegon III got from his father. Do we know of any specifics about their relationship? Thanks. So this is really interesting because he seems very different to his father. His father, of course, is Daemon Targaryen. We see quite a few in Viserys, who seems to be a lot more outgoing, seems to be quite manipulative, seems to be quite keen to be holding on to power. Less so with Aegon. But I think we can see some things here. I think we can see this firm commitment to his brother, which is very strong. There's a vibe. This happens quite a few times in George R. R. Martin with the older and younger brothers having this really strong bond, and the older brother being perhaps the slightly weaker personality, and the younger brother being the power behind the throne, the one who's doing, if not the real ruling, then doing a lot of the protagonist work. We see that in Daemon and his older brother Viserys. We see that in the next generation down with Daemon's children, Aegon and Viserys. This time, Viserys, the younger one, is the more dynamic. And we get Aegon, who takes on a lot more of the kind of the Viserys vibe. He doesn't seem to be particularly outgoing. He doesn't seem to be wanting to go out and proactively manage the Seven Kingdoms. Quite happy to leave that to other people to do stuff. His brother is the one who's doing it. So, pardon me, that's the stronger dynamic. But in terms of what he specifically picked up from his father, I think that he was very strong-minded, which is something he got from Daemon. Daemon clearly knew what he wanted and how he wanted to do things. And that was something which Aegon definitely picked up. Question from Martin S. Did maesters have any special protection or legal immunity or the like due to their title? For example, if they committed a crime or just picked a side in a civil war and that side lost. If the Starks had won, could Pycelle pay? Well, no specific legal immunity. What you find certainly in the build-up to well, actually, if you go back a generation, if you take a look at Maegor, you'll find that he personally killed, I think it was 3 Grand Maesters, and he could just get away with it because he was the ruling lord. The power ultimately resides with the king. The idea of the Maesters is that they give up their surname and they give up any affiliations when they become maesters. So we do not know where all of these different maesters come from. We do not know Pycelle, what's his old surname? We don't know. Lewin, what's his old surname? We don't know. Some of them we hear rumors. Some of them we hear suggestions. But the maesters have to play the game as well. Pycelle is a Lannister loyalist, but he cannot be seen to be a Lannister loyalist. What should happen, if you think back to the first couple of books, Clash of Kings in particular, Maester Lewin was there serving House Stark. When Theon comes in, takes Winterfell, and the Stark boys go missing, presumed dead, he then advises Theon. Now, they have debates. The two of them have sort of debates about this, but Lewin is very clear. I will advise you, as you are the Lord of Winterfell at the moment, in the same way that I advised the previous Lords of Winterfell. But Theon's there saying, if you don't want to do this, you can go and I'll get another maester in. So that's how it works. Yes, the Lord could easily kill them if they wanted to. There could be, if they're seen to be siding with one or the other, then it is entirely within the Lord's right to do that. However, they should be not above the law, but above affiliations, and people should recognize that. So if the Starks had won, to take your specific example, could Pycelle have paid for it? If the Starks had been trying to be kings of the Seven Kingdoms and they had succeeded, then they would very probably have got rid of Pycelle and put their own person in. Absolutely. But that it's not because he was specifically House Lannister, it's because they wanted their own person in there. King of Imps saying, hi, Robert. Hi. What do you think of Aegon's full bellies and dancing bears policy? Do you think it worked well for the average Westerosi, or was it just more words? Now, this is a great question because this is one of those really... the bits of the Regency that I love. I'll actually read this out for those who don't know what the full bellies and dancing bears policy is. This is that great scene where on his name day, Aegon goes into the small council with Viserys and says, what day is it? It's your birthday, you've come of age. And he says, right, in that case, you're all fired. He doesn't say it just like that. They are in the middle of planning for feasts to celebrate his name day, a progress around the Seven Kingdoms so that he can go and meet everybody. Lord Manderley is the hand of the king at the time. And they seem to be doing this broadly in good faith. They're not trying to do anything in particular, but they have not been consulting him. He has not been involved at all. And then we have this fantastic exchange. There will be no progress, the king declared as he was seated. I will not spend a year upon a horse, sleeping in strange beds and trading empty courtesies with drunken lords, half of whom would gladly see me dead if it gained them a groat. If any man requires words with me, he will find me on the Iron Throne. Torren Manderley persisted. Sire, he said, this progress would do much and more to win you the love of the small folk. And then we get the response from new King Aegon III. I mean to give the small folk peace and food and justice. If that will not suffice to win their love, let Mushroom make a progress. Or perhaps we might send a dancing bear. Someone once told me that the commons love nothing half so much as dancing bears. You may call a halt to this feast tonight as well. Send the lords home to their own keeps and give the food to the hungry. Full bellies and dancing bears shall be my policy. So that's as I say, it's a great little quote there. Full bellies and dancing bears shall be my policy. What do we think of it? Well, part of it, I think we have to applaud. If he is genuinely saying, well, let's not have a massive feast for just all of the lords, let's give all of that food to the small folk who really could do with it, that's a good policy. Dancing bears, we may not approve of dancing bears per se, but actually entertaining the masses, again, seems like a good policy. The feeling does seem to be, though, part of this is that he doesn't want to go out. He wants to stay in the Red Keep. He doesn't want to leave. And so he's actually a bit grumpy about all of that. So probably the motivations here aren't as pure as we might think. And we don't know enough about the rest of his reign to know whether he persisted with that. The feeling definitely is that he didn't do all of this great spending. There are echoes of King Viserys I in him, but King Viserys I seemed to love having tourneys and parties and giving lots of gifts to people. Aegon III doesn't seem like that at all. He says, if anyone wants to come and see me, they'll find me sat here in this castle. They have to come here. I'm not going to go out and see them. I'm not going to be doing any big feasts or anything. This is where I am. So the implication is he carried on with it, and so that probably played a reasonable role in keeping the Seven Kingdoms together, because actually, for the first person for a long time, got a king who was caring for them. Let's not forget the reason why we had things like the storming of the Dragon Pit is that the people were starving. The people were taxed beyond that which they could bear. The people had dragons fighting overhead. The people were scared. If this happened, if the food from the feast was given out to the poor, then he may not have ended with a great legacy, but probably at that time that was exactly what the people wanted and loved. I think that's the last question I've got from my patrons about Aegon III. I've got a few more questions just to be going through. Just flicking through the chat. Bread and Circuses says, agree, Weirwood, yes, definitely. Reflective Rambling saying they might not want dancing bears, but Bombadil certainly would. Well, Bombadil would like anyone dancing, I feel sure. Andrew Kay saying it's definitely one of those coming-of-age iconic moments or quotes for Aegon III. Sadly, not many before or since. No, we didn't get much. Sebastian Holden saying Aegon is called the Broken King. Are there any links with Bran? Yeah, that's an interesting link. So Bran is Bran the Broken, and Aegon III is known as the Broken King. He's called the Broken King because he was broken by what happened in the war, in his heart, his soul, if not perhaps as much in his body as some others. But are there echoes? Yeah, I think there are. Then perhaps not as strong, but the Dance of the Dragons was a continent-wide, hugely disruptive civil war that led to thousands, tens of thousands of deaths. Horror across most, particularly the Riverlands, the central part of Westeros, hugely badly affected. And then he is the king who comes out the other side and rules over a broken kingdom, even though he himself is perhaps not the obvious choice, because he himself is broken in some way. That echoes the feel of where we currently think we might be going with Bran. If Bran, and the clue with the direwolf name Summer, is not that he is playing this role, bringing about the end of winter, that would be spring, or the end of the long night, that might be morning, but this is summer. This is what happens afterwards. This is what happens in the longer term after the story finishes. That's when Bran the Broken, we think, will rule. That's the same as Aegon III. And the other thing, and I don't know how far you want to go with this, but the other thing you have to sort of say is Aegon III was the person who was there when dragons stopped being in Westeros. Bran may well be the person who is king when dragons stop being in Westeros for another time. So, yes, there are echoes. I don't think they're hugely strong, but I think there are definitely echoes. Now, reflective rambling, picking up for Tanya Self-Indulgent. Okay, saying, apologies, I probably mispronounced that. Saying, I wonder, could Aegon's decision to get rid of dragons be not just a result of trauma, but because they are bad for the realm? That's not what we're told. I think there are two parts to this. What we're told is not that he decided to get rid of dragons. It's that he didn't want anything to do with dragons in the early part of his reign, and then tried to bring them back. We're not told, again, we may get more of this when we learn more, but we're not told at the moment that he proactively went out and tried to get rid of the dragons that were there, the 4 dragons we know were still alive. It's just that he didn't want new dragons in and around King's Landing. That's the main thing. Might his thinking for that be because he thinks they're not good for the realm? It's possible that might be a part of his thinking. Later on, his thinking was that it was good for Targaryen rule that they do have dragons. So I think he has a mind shift change partway through his reign. And if he does go from what you're suggesting to the bit that we think that he ends up at, then that does seem to imply he moves from caring about the realm to caring about Targaryen rule, which actually is not a good character arc for a leader. Maybe he does go down that route. We don't know. But from what we've had, no, this is not an active decision. It's just that he doesn't want anything to do with dragons. Chaos Ballerina saying, House of the Dragon just announced some new casting. Alan is there, but not Adam. Is this a possible hint to them going with the House of the Dragon Laenor equals Adam tinfoil? Okay, so yes, they have done some new casting. I don't think I tweet. I normally tweet about these things, and maybe I'll maybe after this I'll go and tweet out about it. But they announced, I think, 4 people. The one which caught my eye was Alice Rivers, so we're definitely seeing Alice Rivers happen. Yes, they have got Alan, but not Adam. For those who don't know what this Laenor equals Adam tinfoil is, Adam Laenor in the books dies. Laenor on the show doesn't die. when we get to the dragon seats, somebody claims, Adam Velaryon claims Laenor's old dragon Sea Smoke. The conspiracy theory which some have had is that perhaps this isn't going to be a completely new person, but perhaps Laenor will come back in disguise. Maybe he will grow a big flowing moustache, whatever. And he will come back in disguise and reclaim his dragon, but pretending to be somebody else, pretending to be Adam Velaryon. So is that possible? I mean, I've seen Joe Magician and who else have I seen coming out with this? Grey Area, I think. I think it's possible they might go down that route. The casting, this isn't a complete new set of casting. They've only just started filming. It's entirely possible that the Dragon Seeds, I mean, they'll only be there for half the season. So it's entirely possible that they could even keep him off camera for most of this. So it keeps the thought alive, I think, rather than confirms anything, if that makes sense. Chaos Ballerina, this is your 7-month channel member free super chat. So here we go. Why do you think, on a thematic level, George R. R. Martin killed Jaehaera, then letting the war end with both houses united and both lines continuing together? So why did he do that on a thematic level? And I don't know if there is a theme. The fact is that, okay, I will try and pick up a potential theme that we might have here, which is that whereas Wiseheads may have tried to pull the Seven Kingdoms back together, the Seven Kingdoms is always going to, as long as people are trying to get power, trying to get the Iron Throne, there will always be the Game of Thrones. There will always be people dying. So thematically, that makes sense for him. This isn't just suddenly everything works out fine. They brought everything together. That's it. The end. Let's move on. It's they brought everything together, but let's be realistic. What happens then? People will try and claim power. So it fits absolutely within his worldview, the way that he has presented the world of Ice and Fire. So I don't think there's a thematic thing other than staying true to the way that he thinks or he has decided to portray his world. Seek and Destroy 99. Do you think Maegor wasn't actually cruel? Seems like he cared about his family and doesn't come off as cruel as some other kings. I did do a video on this not too long ago. The title was How Cruel Was Maegor? So if you want a longer answer to this, then feel free to go and check out that video. My the short answer to this is yes, I think he was very cruel. Now, your mileage may vary as to why you think other kings may be more or less cruel. I think that that you could probably make a case for other Targaryen kings being more cruel if you wish, but on any objective scale, the things that he did, the amount of times that he would actively be torturing people, killing people unnecessarily, gaining pleasure from others' pain, those are all incredibly cruel things. And this wasn't just like one-off here or there. These weren't things that were absolutely necessary in order to keep power. These were things over and above that. So if you want the greater details on all of those things, the one which always comes up just because it's the biggest scale thing was the Red Keep. He had people building the Red Keep. He had lots of secret passages in there made in order to protect the secrets of the Red Keep. He then did a feast for all of the builders when it was finished, and then had them all killed. That's cruel. But then that's just the start in many ways. After that, he decided he wanted to marry 3 women who didn't want to marry him, and he forced them to by killing their husbands, getting their children, and threatening their children, which is cruel. There are levels to this, and even some things which are not easily described on a family show that he would do down in the black cells of the Red Keep. Yes, he was cruel. Is my take on that one, I'm afraid. Let's go to some questions from. Well, let's look at a couple of things just in case you missed them in the wider world. I won't dwell on these unless you want to ask about them. Witcher Season 2 teaser trailer launched yesterday, I think it was. And there's not huge amounts in that in terms of what they're revealing. But they did confirm this is going to be released in 2 parts. Season 3 of The Witcher. I think I've seen Lauren Hisrich, the showrunner, who initially said she didn't want it to be there. So obviously this is sort of the higher ups who've decided that this is how they want to release it. But I think I've seen her say that the break is for the second half. For those who've read Time of Contempt, the whole incident at Thaneth, that is going to take up the second half of the series. The first of the season, the first half of the season is going to be all the build up to that. So that's where the break is. I don't think we can add much more onto that at the moment. I could have done a teaser trailer breakdown, but I don't think it tells us huge amounts at this stage. Secondly, if like me you're a fan of Black Mirror is returning. They've also done a teaser trailer, and that came out today. That's happening in June, I think. And one other thing, just to pick up, I had a question from last week that I didn't answer because I had a mind blank on. I do sometimes have mind blanks on things. This is from Filth121 asking, why is there a magical purse in Lord of the Rings? This is in The Hobbit. For those, and I can't remember whether it was actually in the films or not, but it's certainly in the book. Chapter 2, quite early on, if you remember, when you get the trolls, and Bilbo's there, and he's sort of sneaking around trying to find out what happened to their horses, and he's sneaking around, and he just sort of picks a pocket of one of the trolls, and there's a purse. It was sort of bag size to him, but there was a purse in it, and the purse suddenly says, "Here, who are you?" It's written like that, and that alerted the trolls to the fact that he was there, and he got captured because of that. So why is it there? Well, in world, I think we can probably reasonably say it's pretty clear that these trolls have been taking things from all over the place and working their way across Middle-earth. When afterwards the dwarves go and find the troll cave, they find all manner of exciting things going on there. This is where they find things like Orcrist and Glamdring and Sting, the treasures from many, many years ago. So this is not a magical troll thing. It's something that they took from somewhere else. So that's why in world, as for sort of bigger themes, that Tolkien, he does this every now and then. Actually, when you read through it, he sometimes has this kind of like a a sense of humor that just loves the small things. This is a children's book. Let's not forget The Hobbit. We sometimes analyze it as if it's, which it is obviously a great work of art, but we sometimes analyze it at a much deeper level than that. This is a children's book, and we get the idea that Bilbo's first action as a burglar is foiled by the fact that the thing he tries to steal objects to it. I think is the kind of humor that Tolkien enjoyed. So I wouldn't personally look into it any more than that. If you want another example of his rather idiosyncratic, whimsical sense of humor, just look out for in The Lord of the Rings the shift, the POV shift to the fox. If you know, you know on that one. It's caused huge amounts of debate, but I think it shows a little bit of his whimsical humor. Martin S saying, do you view the distinction between book and show canon in George R. R. Martin's world the same way as book versus movie in the case of Lord of the Rings? I think that George R. R. Martin shows maybe more canon than Lord of the Rings movies because of George R. R. Martin's personal involvement. Yeah, canon's an odd thing, but I would agree with you 100% that there is a clear difference, not just between the Game of Thrones world and Lord of the Rings, but all different types of fantasy, adapted fantasy worlds. George R. R. Martin has very clearly clarified in his interview with History of Westeros from what must be a year or so ago now. I thought it was a fantastic interview, and they got a very clear answer, I think, from him about how he views canon between the books and the TV shows, and what he views his role as being vis-a-vis the different canons. And at a very high level, there are two different canons. There's the book canon that he is in complete control of, and then there's show canon that he is not in complete control of. However, he sees himself as having two roles in. Role number one is to make sure that each and every TV show is as close as possible to book canon. And role number two is to make sure that as far as is possible for him, each and every bit of show canon is consistent with other bits of show canon. Now, that means that what we have is a closer bond between the two, a clear dividing line between the two canons, but a closer bond between them because George R. R. Martin has put himself in that place. And that does mean that we sometimes get things that are revealed in the shows that he will sort of give a thumbs up to, sometimes explicitly, sometimes implicitly. Now, going back to the show, whether these still count or not is a completely different debate. But going back to the show, I mentioned that handover meeting he had, and the showrunners were very clear that they had what they call, I can't remember what they exactly referred to them as, but 3 WTF moments that made them go, whoa, I didn't see that coming. And George R. R. Martin told them, and they included that in the show. These were Shireen, Hodor, and King Bran. So those are those moments we can take with some reasonable certainty as being what at that time of the handover meeting George R. R. Martin intended to happen in the books. Similarly, when we get this prophecy, Aegon's prophecy, the Song of Ice and Fire, that happens in the show, George R. R. Martin has made it pretty clear. He's not said it exactly like this, but he's made it pretty clear that this is something which is happening in the books as well. He's not going to tell us the details because we will find out the details in the books. But the idea that the Targaryens have some prophecy handed down generation to generation, which is guiding their actions within Westeros, is from him, even though it first appeared in the show. So that's how the comparison is. When we get to Lord of the Rings, to take the example because you're using it, but you could equally use it for other shows. When other fantasy worlds, when we come to the Lord of the Rings, then we have a different setup because when you get the films, for example, the Peter Jackson films, are they canon? Well, then they've changed huge amounts from the books, but certainly the main Lord of the Rings trilogy worked really well in and of itself, and that kept its own internal canon, as it were. So it's sort of the same, but it doesn't have Tolkien sort of saying, okay, this bit's fine, because he wasn't around. With Tolkien and that whole world, we've had sort of ever-decreasing circles of what we can consider to be authoritative. When Tolkien was around, obviously, he is the person who could say, when Christopher Tolkien was around, then I think we could definitely take what he said as being pretty authoritative. But the further we've moved away from that, then the less so. Each different fantasy world is slightly different. The Wheel of Time is a fascinating one. I'm going off on a digression here. Apologies, this probably wasn't what you were wanting, but Wheel of Time is a fascinating one because obviously Robert Jordan has died. However, Brandon Sanderson, who wrote the last 3 books after Robert Jordan died and based on Robert Jordan's notes, is still alive. And he has sort of given the thumbs up to the TV show, even though, again, there are huge changes from the books. So every different fantasy world is slightly different in those regards. Jay Sheth saying, Aegon III felt like he had a schizoid personality adaptation. Any thoughts? I mean, I don't know. This is where probably I would defer to a sort of professional psychologist on that. My take on, as I said earlier in the stream, my general take is that he definitely showed some kind of post-traumatic stress, which shows in his strong reactions against having dragon eggs around. It's not just, he didn't just all say, I don't want them. He got angry that they were there. And that clearly seems to be, as a result, understandably, that he'd seen his mother be eaten by a dragon, and therefore he doesn't want dragon eggs around. And also he does seem to show a lot of signs of depression. Beyond that, I personally wouldn't wish to go, but that's, I can certainly understand where you're coming from. AK Channel TV saying, was there a better duo, King and Hand, in history than Aegon III and Viserys? Just wanted to know your take. I mean, I suppose it depends what you count as a better duo. There are certainly quite a few who follow a very similar kind of dynamic, where the king doesn't have huge amounts to do with it, but the hand seems very competent. That actually, Viserys and Otto Hightower worked very well. Otto Hightower, we're told, was competent and the realm prospered. It's only sort of later on, when he seemed to get above his station, that there were problems. When he was just running the kingdom, it all seemed to be working quite well. Similarly, Tywin, early on with Aerys II, that seemed to start with to work very well. When we get Bloodraven and Daeron, similarly, that seems to have worked quite well. It's when the figurehead, the king, is happy to be figurehead and actually let the head of state, as we would probably call it now, and let the hand of the king act as the head of government, as we would probably call it now. That's when it seems to work most effectively. Let's go to this last question, I think, from my patrons. This one, again, this is a Duncan Egg question, 444. Do you think that George R. R. Martin will write a couple of new Duncan Egg novellas just after The Winds of Winter? As the Hedge Knight shouldn't be the most difficult season to make, mostly a tourney location, lack of big battles, no need for extensive CGI. I expect it to be ready 2 to 3 years from now. So if George R. R. Martin wants to include this new story about Dornish adventure, this must be ready before the writers start work on the second season. Okay, there's a few things in there I'd just love to unpack. The first one is that, yes, he has hinted at this idea of another Dunk and Egg story between Dunk and Egg 1 and Dunk and Egg 2, which is fascinating because this clearly implies that he's not necessarily writing these just in chronological order, which gives the big hope that if he can go some certain way and then jump back, maybe he'll decide he wants to jump forward. Maybe he could do, I mean, and this is just me hoping more than anything else, but maybe he could decide he might want to do a few of the ones that we would find intriguing towards the end of it. Maybe the ones where we get instances when Jenny of Oldstones and the Woods Witch appear. Maybe the very end with the tragedy at Summerhall. Maybe he could jump forward to that and then jump back. Who knows? But if he does want to have another story that is between 1 and 2, you would assume that the TV show will want to do in chronological order. It's one thing for him to be doing random stories at random points in the timeline. It's a completely different thing for a TV show with clear actors who will be aging to be jumping about a lot. So, in terms of timeline, what does that mean? Well, he has basically said when he finishes The Winds of Winter, he will write a Dunk and Egg story. Might he write 2? Yeah, I think he could write 2. He has got one half written already, She-Wolves of Winterfell. He's got one plotted out in his mind already. The Village Hero, which is probably based in the Riverlands, between fighting between Blackwoods and the Brackens, which might be fun. And he's got this idea of something, we don't know how developed it is, set in Dawn, before the Swan Sword. So might he write all 3 of them? Possibly. We know what he's like. If he gets excited about something, then he writes it quite quickly. And I could certainly see he has in the past said that he sees the Dunk and Egg stories happening in sort of trilogies. Whether he still sees that, I don't know. But certainly the first 3 that he's released, he sort of saw as a trilogy. So it would make sense for him to write the next 3 as a sort of trilogy. In terms of the timing, I touched on this a little bit earlier. I think us seeing it in 2 to 3 years, I think that's on the ambitious end of things. This seems to have been an early announcement, by which I mean that the timing of this announcement was to publicize the new HBO streaming service, Max, rather than when they might otherwise have greenlit it. From what we read, the first episode has been largely written and is good, but they are writing the rest. And they're early enough in that process that George R. R. Martin says he thinks it'll be 6 episodes, but he's not 100% sure. Certainly that's the situation a couple of weeks ago. So if they're still potentially debating how many episodes, then they're quite a long way to go on that. And then after that, they've obviously got casting, locations, appointing all of the people who are going to be part of running the show. Then they'll have to film the thing. If they get it started before the end of next year, I think that'll be good progress. If they get it filmed before the summer of 2025, if that's where we are, then that will be good. If we see it before 2026, that would be very, very, very good, in my view. I wouldn't be surprised if it's 2027. These things can slip. It is simpler to film than a season of House of the Dragon. Should be shorter, but this is the first season, and so new crew being brought together. This will be happening while they're doing House of the Dragon, so it's not as if they're just taking people doing House of the Dragon and moving them across. They will have to come up with new filming locations, sets, and crew as well. So this is going to be quite a big enterprise to be doing this. But yes, the overall feeling is this is exciting. George R. R. Martin, I take him at his word at the moment. He may change his mind later on, but at the moment, I completely take him at his word. He is intending to be writing these before they appear. Let's go to question from Martin S. Is the flora and fauna of George R. R. Martin's world and Tolkien's world very similar to the real world? Monsters, dragons, etc. aside, of course. Are plant species the same? Can it be assumed that blueberries, raspberries, etc. exist? Well, certainly in Middle Earth, yes, very much so. This was something if you read the contents of Bilbo's larder and pantry, then it's basically what you would get from sort of a Middle England sort of rural farming community. That's the kind of thing that you would find. Hobbits loved eating blackberries. They would have pork pies, eggs, that kind of thing. So that's the kind of feel that's there. In Westeros, broadly, George R. R. Martin does have a few sort of extra kind of bits that he puts in there, but still, if you read, he loves doing his descriptions of food. George R. R. Martin. I was reading for a video I'm going to be doing very soon, actually, rereading the Purple Wedding chapters, and he gives very detailed descriptions of the food that's there. And yeah, broadly speaking, it's similar to ours. He does add in a few extra little flourishes here or there, and things that sound slightly more fantastical. But no, generally speaking, it's similar. Okay, I think that is the last of my questions. Having a quick flick through. Andrew K saying Jaehaerys I and Septon Bath is one of the best duos in my opinion. Yeah, absolutely, that's right. Nonabir Mitra saying Joe Magician's theory of Larys Strong being Bloodraven's predecessor in the Weirwood network is very similar to Bran's fate in A Song of Ice and Fire. Yep, that's true. Yeah, I think with that, I will start to bring this to a close. But important thing to say before we go, next week, if you watch these live, next week, you will find that this live stream is going to be on my other channel. You will find a link down there in the description. You will find a link probably if you're watching live right now. I'm sure one of the moderators will be putting it in wherever your live chat is. Also appearing in a few minutes, if you're watching this back a bit later, will be right in the middle here, a link to IDG Live. IDG Live is where I'm going to be putting all of my live content, my short form videos, which you can also now find on TikTok if you want to go and hunt me down there. I'll be doing interviews. I've got a few other crazy ideas of things I want to be doing there, but basically it's going to be a lot more me to camera kind of stuff happening over there. This channel is going to carry on focusing on the traditional videos, the kinds of things that you know that I do. Hopefully this is going to allow people to be finding the delivery style that they like, and hopefully this will be introducing a whole lot more people to a whole lot more of these wonderful worlds that we enjoy talking about. But that's next week. In the meantime, if you're watching this back a bit later, appearing somewhere around here is a link to other live streams that I have been doing. A link somewhere around here is going to be appearing to my Patreon, which is the best way to support this channel if you wish to do so. But the big thing, ding, 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 in the middle here is a link to IDG Live. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, patrons. Thank you, moderators. I will see you next week over on IDG Live. Take care.